Hey everyone, welcome to episode 6, right?
What? 6 episodes?
Crazy!
Yeah.
Of the OK. That means we've been doing this 6 months.
Yeah, 6 months.
That means we
That's half a year.
Yeah. Wow, we've
half
committed.
a year of doing this. We've committed. You've committed, hopefully.
Yes.
If this is your first time, please commit.
Yeah.
We want you to
Quit
commit.
screwing around. You know,
Yeah.
it's time.
It's time.
Get on board with the OK Guard Show. Because if you don't, you're going to miss out on things like today's episode, money management.
Cha-ching.
Yeah. You want to make money. I mean, who doesn't like money?
I like money.
I feel like we could say that's a fact that everyone does.
Yeah.
Perhaps it is an opinion. I don't know.
Do you know who else likes money? The people I owe money to for my credit card.
Yeah.
My landlord.
Yeah. Student loans.
No, they really like money.
They love it.
I think sometimes more than me.
Yeah.
But we talked about a lot of those things.
Yeah.
And it's really good information, good knowledge to know how I can handle my financial situation.
Yeah.
And it left me more informed, but also wanting to ask more questions.
Absolutely. We talked retirement. I mean, it's never too late to start planning for your retirement, and there's so much that goes into it. Today's episode, we skimmed the surface, and we're actually going to bring Shea Cockrell, who's our guest. He's a CPA. We're going to bring him back on the show for specific segments on this because it's just such a broad topic that we think could really help you all out and your families. So, yeah.
100%. So we'll stop talking about it, and we'll get right to it. We hope you enjoy the show.
Thank you for coming on the show. I think this was probably one of our favorite topics because it's so important, and I think all of us in here obsess over our finances, and we wanted to get the word out on how to properly do that so that you can best set yourself up for now and the future. So that's why we have you on the show, so we really appreciate it.
Of course, yes.
Go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Shea Cockrell. I am a CPA. Currently, I work here as the staff accountant for the comptroller here in the USPFO. Before I was in the Guard, I was a tax accountant in a public firm for a while. After that, I was a controller for a small company, and then I was doing audit work for them as well after that. So kind of have a breadth of experience.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so you're the right guy for the show. What is a CPA?
So CPA is a certified public accountant. So the duty of a CPA is to serve the public in a trusted, professional, advisory sense. So and that's coming from the AICPA Code of Professional Conduct and the Oklahoma Board of Accountancy statutes, and you'll see CPAs working in a wide variety of areas of money, if you will, and that includes auditing, tax, other financial services, but the majority of people will see CPAs for tax reasons. Yeah. So
okay, now are you do CPAs get certain training for their state they're in, or is it kind of an overall for the entire nation? Like, how does that work? Could you skip state to state, and will what you talk about today help people who may live out of state?
Yes, so to answer your last question, yes, it will help you in no matter what state you're in. So each state has a board of accountancy, and the requirements to become a CPA differ slightly from state to state, but the majority of them are very uniform. The primary thing you're going to hear professionals talking about is the CPA exam, and that is a uniform exam throughout all the states. Okay. And that's a 4-part exam to include everything from financial reporting to the business environment and other regulations. So it's a pretty well-versed, wide topic set of exams since there's a total of 4.
So when should you see a CPA? And I've got should it be should you make a certain amount in order to see a CPA? Should it be when you first get your big adult job, or how does it work?
So if we're focusing on the tax side of the house here, I mean, like I said before, they do audit services and other things too. But for tax purposes, it's not necessarily how much money you make. It's the complexity of your finances. So we're dealing with if you have everything from an oil and gas interest or more complex things. So if you're a 2 W-2 household, I'd recommend you may get more bang for your buck going to a TurboTax or whatever, some of those more cost-effective ways to do your taxes. But even if you're unsure about your tax position or anything about your money, I'd recommend going to a CPA because they should be there to help you.
Yeah. And on the financial advising side of it, when should someone come to a CPA and talk about what they should do with their money?
Sure. So you can be talking about retirement. We could be talking about trusts, those types of things. If CPAs should be well versed in a lot of different areas, however, CPAs do not specialize in everything, so you have to go to a CPA that is specialized in that area. But for tax purposes specifically, you should be dealing with stuff like inheritances. That's a good one because there could be some tax consequences there. There's a ton of different topics we could talk about here.
Marriage and...
It depends.
Okay.
That could be a clean where you get married, and again, you still have 2 W-2, so it should be easy. But it really depends. If you have any questions, it's better to go see one than to not.
Sure. Okay. So, what are the biggest mistakes that you see people making with their money?
So, it comes in two areas, I would say. One is wrapped up in this idea of debt. The biggest one I see is somebody going out and purchasing a vehicle, a car that they really should not be able to afford.
Sure.
Again, not targeted at anybody in particular, just giving an example here. If you are making $40,000 a year, you probably shouldn't go out and buy a $50,000 truck.
Sure.
That's probably not, from a wisdom standpoint, a good idea. Yeah. Another one is credit card debt. That's someone you have to be really careful about. But looking from a threshold on that vehicle, a good way to look at that would be to not exceed more than 10% of your take-home pay for that.
So what about biggest mistakes you see people not doing with their money?
A combination of paying down that debt if they have any, and retirement. Retirement's the big one. Okay. We think we are younger than we really are a lot of times. So for those individuals that are approaching retirement, they may not realize, I'm going to need a lot more than I really actually have. Right. So retirement is key throughout most of this discussion.
And we'll get into the retirement piece, which is absolutely a huge thing. I know a lot of people who are toward the end of their retirement, and they realize that they planned on retiring at a certain age, and they look at it and they say, you know what, I probably should keep working for another 5 years to try to save up.
Yeah, of course.
Which is, I wouldn't want to go through that where you're like, hey, I'm about to be done. You look at your accounts and you're like, just kidding, I need to work a little bit more.
It's a little depressing. Yeah.
So we today are going to try to figure out how to educate everyone on, and by we I mean you, because I'm just here to guide things. So on how to set people up for success. So sure. If there's one thing you would recommend someone do with their money, what would it be? If there was just one thing, what would that be?
Ooh, so like I've stated before, these two things go hand in hand. But the thing that's going to kill you the most, besides not being able to retire on time, is your debt. Okay. Interest, compounding interest is a huge thing. So being able to go out and spend $10,000 on a credit card that's yielding about 24% APR, it's going to kill you. So pay down the debt.
Can you give us a quick and easy to understand example of if you spend $100 and you have a 24%, or easy math, you're probably good at math, I would assume, but calculator, no, but just kind of for our listeners, a very easy to understand explanation using numbers of compound interest with, say, a credit card.
Yeah, so they get really complicated really fast. So to give you just a really simple interest method, it gets more complicated than this, of course, but if you've got $100 and 24% interest annually, And it's not, this example is using compound annually, not semi-annually or monthly or whatever term.
Which those do, right?
Right.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, based on the agreement, but just really simple math here. You've got $100, $24 in 1 year. So you add it on. Let's say you don't make a payment in that year. Some people either, just don't realize, I have to make a payment, or they default or whatever. So 24%, that's $124. So the next year is 124 times 1.24, and that accrues over years and years and years. So, and that's exactly that's the reverse of retirement, right? So the idea compound can help you on the retirement side.
Sure.
So you put money in your 20s, 30s, 40s. When you retire in your late 50s, 60s, 70s, you should be accruing a lot more interest to help you.
Okay. How can I retire at the age of 35, which is 3 years from now?
So most people would say win the lottery. However, I would tell you don't play the lottery.
So say, how much money should I put into the lottery for my odds to,
So, I mean, you hear people that have better odds getting struck by lightning than winning the lottery. So just want to keep that in mind.
Sure. I will take that under advisement. So let's talk about debt. Budgeting and paying off debt, kind of a combo. So how should one budget, and what are the most important categories to consider when you are creating that budget?
Right. So the things you need to live, obviously, are the most important here. So we're talking about housing, food. We live in Oklahoma, so we don't have public transportation that is readily available for the most part, right? We don't live in New York that have subways, so we have to pay for our car. Insurance, I would recommend health insurance. That's kind of a sensitive topic for some people with Obamacare and all of that. For us that are in the military or federal employees in general, it is a good deal to have health insurance. So budget that. Retirement is something you should automatically think, yes, I'm going to put money in retirement regardless. Our audience here, I'm assuming, is more of the military federal employee side in the state side. So you have a certain match that is given to you based on how much you're contributing into your retirement. So at the bare minimum, you want to be putting that amount that you're at least going to get matched by.
Otherwise, you're losing
it's free money.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we can talk about later on, I'm assuming, how we can go about raising and lowering that to help you.
Sure.
And the biggest one after the primary things is your debt.
Yeah.
So after all of that, people could be thinking to themselves while they're budgeting, how in the world am I going to take this little amount that I'm making and stretching it to all these things I'm trying to accomplish, right? And the key is cutting your expenses.
Yeah.
So I talk to my grandparents and people of that generation sometimes, and they see, DirecTV or cable or whatever, not picking on them, of course, but that's maybe not be a necessity, right? If you need it for retirement or something else, I would assume that retirement is a better investment than paying your $300 for DirecTV every month. Just thoughts like that. There are a bunch of different areas and ways to cut expenses, but those are the main areas you should be considering.
Okay. So pretty much if it's not, would you say, and in your professional opinion, there's a life you can lead where you are just looking at the future only and not really enjoying what you could be doing by spending a little bit extra and treating yourself?
Treat yourself.
Treat yourself.
Absolutely not. Okay. You're going to reach a point of burnout if you do that. There is a good hybrid there that you can do stuff you want to do now by also planning for the future. It's just being responsible about it. There's a word there called what is reasonable. What's reasonable. For example, my wife and I budget a certain amount of money to go on dates every month, and that's something important. If you're in a marriage, you should be fostering that. That's important.
What are the best ways to pay off your debt?
And so this is a really good question, and this name's going to come up probably multiple times during this discussion. Dave Ramsey. He is very conservative. There are some things I agree with him on, some things that I believe he's a little too staunch. But in this section, he has a really good description of two methods. There's the snowball method and then the avalanche method. You may already know about some of these.
I'm familiar with the snowball method.
And that was the idea of you paying your smaller debt down first, and then as you're paying off those debts, the minimum payment you can now wrap into the next smaller payment, the debt amount, and then it snowballs up to that bigger debt number. The avalanche method, if you have some self-control, this is going to save you more money than the snowball method. It's paying down the debt that has the higher interest rate. So if you are looking at, just make it super simple, a credit card with 24% APR, a student loan that has 4%, and some other debt that has 3%. It's paying off the credit card debt first, even though it may be a higher balance, because you're going to be saving more interest over the long term. So those just a small comparison, but
What if your funds are limited? So the example I have, you live paycheck to paycheck, not you. Just let's say there's someone who lives,
Of course.
by the time they pay for the things that are absolutely necessary for their livelihood, food, shelter, their rent or mortgage or whatever it may be, and everything they need in order to be able to get to work, gas and things like that, and they have very little or nothing left after the end of the month, what do you recommend?
that's really hard. And I'm assuming we're past exhausting all necessary and reasonable ways to cut expenses here.
Going through and cutting for livelihood type stuff, like the treating yourself
stuff. Even for a short time. If we're past that point and we've exhausted that, there are some more. There's be some greater changes that can be made, and these. Some people may see these as, I don't want to do that. It's going to change more of my lifestyle up. We're talking about getting a job that's closer to you to save on transportation costs. If you're, this is just a really hard topic because a lot of people see this on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes it's really unfortunate. It's just trying to find a drastic way to make that better for you. And there's no one solution fits all for this, but
there are times I feel that, and a lot of people go through this, that is just the way they live. It's paycheck to paycheck to get by. So if they have debt, should they focus on, because you want an emergency fund as well. If they do have debt, but they have no savings, what should they focus on first? If they are able to find, even if it's $50 a month that they can put towards something, what should they focus on first?
Well, this is what Dave Ramsey recommends, and I do too because it's a good strategy. Step one is to create an $1,000 emergency fund. Here in Oklahoma, that's a good reasonable amount. If you were living in somewhere that had a higher cost of living, like a New York or a San Francisco, this may be a little bit higher here. But as long as you're making your minimum debt payments, I would put that $50 a month in your example to building up that $1,000 emergency fund in the savings, and you don't touch it.
Okay. So let's say it's $50 extra you have a month. That is all you have extra after groceries and everything, right? And your minimum payment for your credit card is $15. You save $15 and the rest of it into savings and don't touch.
Correct.
I also want to point out, I know Dave Ramsey's a very a go-to for money management. For the show, we don't endorse, and we're just talking about his methods of money.
Yes.
So that's just to let everyone know that we're not saying use Dave Ramsey, but there are methods that he has created to help get rid of debt and build up for a financial future. So if you are fortunate enough to have a surplus of funds at the end of the month after everything's paid for, what should be done with that surplus if someone does have debt?
So first step obviously is to pay down the debt, and using one of those methods, snowball method or avalanche method, but that does not include your home. And we can talk about that here after a while on what that looks like on paying down a mortgage or even getting a mortgage. But that's first priority, because that's going to kill you in the long run. The priority after that is creating a bigger savings buffer. So we're talking 3 to 6 months of necessary expenses. Here in Oklahoma, you're probably leaning toward 3 or 4 months.
That's if you lose your job or something.
Right.
Okay.
Right. As federal employees, it's a little bit more of a squishy thing we can talk about, because you're not likely going to be losing your job as often as somebody who's in industry, just by, if you look at the numbers.
Right. Well, and I mean, if you get affected by a government shutdown, which happened recently.
That's right. Yep.
Having that in the bank is good, because there are banks that offer a very low interest loan for people to cover, but then you're putting yourself back into debt. On the debt thing, and I didn't add this into the questions, but what's your professional opinion on if you have multiple loans everywhere, consolidating that to make one payment?
It depends on what type of debt we're talking about. Okay. So we have to be careful, because a lot of times when you're consolidating, you have to deal with fees for consolidation. And that's the way these banks and them try to pay for them taking a lower rate on a consolidation, is by imposing fees that makes up for that difference in your rate. So we're talking about a couple $1,000s to consolidate, tens of thousands of dollars. Right. And you have to weigh, and it's something a CPA or a financial advisor can help you with, trying to weigh the benefits of doing that. There's some convenience by going to one source to pay a debt payment, but if in the long run you're actually paying more because of the consolidation, that's really not helping you. You're just going to have to get in a rhythm, a battle rhythm, if you will, to pay down this debt, because you have to aggressively pay it down. If you're not on top of it, it'll be on top of you.
Is there any way that people who are just hammered with debt because of, it could have been an emergency, they had to, for something to eat, maybe to even save a life, a kid had to go to the hospital, they didn't have insurance, and now they're, are there ways to negotiate with those companies to lower that debt? I mean, is that a possibility for someone?
Yes, absolutely, especially with hospitals.
Okay.
I've had clients that have had heart attacks, and we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars because they didn't have good insurance. It was catastrophic, and they had a threshold that they met, and they didn't pay any more. So they just called the hospital, and there are programs out there to help you. The hospitals will know more about these. So be mindful about that kind of stuff before you just start making payments, because always negotiate if you can.
I'll use a personal example. So my dad had to get a stent recently, and he actually talked to the hospital about, and he got it lowered, the bill he had, by probably $700. It wasn't a whole lot compared to the full bill, but it still helped a lot. And it was just a matter of a phone call, which was awesome. And some people, I don't think, know that they can do that, and that everything is negotiable. So you talked about how much you should have in savings, not necessarily a number, or you did talk a number, but a time period wise that would get you through you losing your job or something like that.
Right.
So when is it okay to dip into your savings account?
Sure. So just to make a small distinction here, we're not talking about retirement accounts. We're talking about a liquid savings account. Good things to dip in for would be medical. I would not say liquidate the whole savings for just one payment, of course, because you can, like we already talked about, negotiate that down. But medical, if we're talking about repairing your car at a reasonable place to get you back to work, things to get you back on track, not going out and buying something frivolous that's not going to help you make money.
What if it's you've saved up for a couple of years to make a down payment on a house? It's a down payment to go into a debt on a house, but you're renting, and I know there's opinions on renting is just throwing money away, and if you own, it's yours, and it's helpful more so. But there are different opinions on that, and I'm not commenting on either one of those. But if you do want to dip into your savings, say you have 20% on a $100,000 home, you have 20 grand in your house. Well, you want a lower interest rate, and you also want a lower payment. You take a chunk of that and put it toward your down payment. Is that a good idea or no?
Yes, absolutely. the couple of reasons you'd want to do that. 20% is a magical number the banks like to use, because anything over that you're paying what's called no PMI.
Yep.
And that is essentially a risk-adjusted number that says if you're under 20%, you are more likely to default based on some magical calculations that are behind the scenes. So you have to pay that premium, that's what the P stands for in PMI, to essentially compensate the bank for that that down payment.
Except for, and I learned this the hard way, an FHA loan, which is now you pay MIP or PMI, what the mortgage insurance premium for the life of the loan.
Right. And what you really have to do when you're buying a house is take a good look, and you may take spreadsheets out on the table, no kidding, to compare your rates and if you're getting any tax benefits on the back end. But yes, you really have to do your math there.
A time like that is that when you're looking at a home to set an appointment with your CPA and take a look at your options and just have a person who is knowledgeable in that to help kind of guide you through the best option?
Absolutely. And a lot of this is not just a CPA can help you here. I would recommend one if you are really not sure. But some of this is common knowledge too, going to people that have been in the industry for a while. I'm not saying don't trust your mortgage broker.
Right.
Always get a second opinion, and that applies to anything. We're talking
C. Jones. He's in the process of buying a house.
Compare mortgage rates between companies. That's important.
Okay. I have a CPA for you to talk to, Jones, if he's actually sitting right in front of me. Convenient.
I don't know who that is.
Yeah.
Now for a quick break. Hey, do you hear that? No, that wasn't... Okay, that might have been your dog, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this glorious music coming through your speakers right into your ear holes. It's a new theme song for the OK Guard Show called 0500, written, recorded, mixed, and produced by Sergeant Colin Farrell, who's a member of the 145th Army Band. Those instruments you hear, those are also members of the 145th Army Band. We have Sergeant First Class Andrew Brooks slapping the skins on the drum set, Sergeant First Class Gene Morrison on that trombone, Sergeant Hector Lopez rocking on the guitar, Sergeant Justin Stanton, electric bass, Sergeant Leon Williams, baritone saxophone, and of course, Sergeant Colin Farrell, alto sax. Evan Drum, who's a recording engineer, also helped run the recording session. We at the OK Guard Show would like to extend our sincerest thank you to Sergeant Colin Farrell and the members of the 145th Army Band who helped put together the new theme song for our show. We are extremely thankful for the amazing talent and creativity that we have in the Oklahoma National Guard. We hope you enjoy just as much as we are. Now, back to the show.
What are your options when thinking about savings versus emergency, keeping it separate from your retirement fund? And if you could, for our listeners, what is the difference between your savings account, an emergency fund, and a retirement account?
Okay, so first of all, gold is not a good alternative.
Don't bury gold in your backyard.
Do not bury gold.
What about cash and tin cans in your backyard?
That's not a good idea either.
What if you bury it deep enough where it won't be, dug up by a dog?
Then go on ahead then, right?
Yeah, okay, cool. Because I hear if you plant a seed, just like money, it grows.
The money tree.
So the money tree.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's go with the retirement account first.
Okay.
The retirement account is something that should not be touched. And I know we haven't talked about TSP or 401ks yet here, but you have the option as a federal employee with TSP to even draw loans against your retirement. Do not do that.
Okay.
That is not a good idea.
When would you say it's okay to do that? There's got to be a situation where it's like...
Okay, so there are. It's very, very slim, and there are other avenues to go down before you do it. If you have to, it would be for an absolute emergency, because what the consequences of that is you're paying back yourself in your own interest in the TSP, and you may even get a better rate going to get a loan. be careful what you pull on the debt, right? But you have to compare that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So that's a retirement account. And when you pull money out of your retirement account, that's not a loan. If you're not 59 and a half, you will possibly take a penalty. And you have to record that on your tax return. And not only pay the penalty, but pay the taxes on the interest.
Yeah.
So it's a double hit there.
So exhaust all efforts before you go that route.
Right.
Okay.
So let's swing to the other side. You've got a savings account. And so a savings account, I believe, in my personal opinion, the definition of that is something that is highly liquid, something that is either in cash or very close to cash that can be taken out and turned into cash in probably a week or two.
Okay.
There's a middle ground here, and I'm very, very reluctant to talk about it because it's highly abused. It's the option of having a Roth IRA. Okay. So just a little background on IRAs. It's an individual retirement account that's through a company. There's numerous ones out there that provide this service. What's the difference between a Roth and a traditional? That's what they're called.
I always forget this.
So a traditional is where the contributions going into the retirement account are deductible on your tax return as they go in. So what that means is if you put $5,000 in a traditional IRA, you deduct $5,000 on your tax return that year. The year of contribution. And the other one is a Roth IRA, which that means you don't deduct them on your tax returns going in. So people are going to be asking, well, why in the world would you not choose the traditional? Because you get a tax deduction, right? Well, in a Roth, you pay taxes now, but as the funds grow, they are not, when you pull them out, they are not taxed. So in the long run, if you believe there's a risk analysis there, if you believe you could possibly be making more later on in your life, you may be getting better results on your tax returns by contributing to a Roth. There's also this other benefit.
To keep your AGI down? Is that what, or is that?
In your later years. So when you pull them out in a Roth, the taxable portion will be very low, if not non-existent.
Because you've already paid them.
Correct.
Okay.
You pay the taxes going in on them. So on a traditional, you deduct them now, but you pay the taxes on the interest later.
Okay.
So as you pull them out.
Okay.
So if you think you're going to be making more money in retirement, it may be more beneficial to you to be in a lower tax bracket to pay them now going in.
Okay.
So personally, I use a Roth. For the majority of people in their younger years, it is more beneficial to do so. Okay. Unless there is some weird tax situation you're in, and then a CPA can help you analyze that. But going back to the difference between a savings and a retirement account, that Roth IRA is in the middle for one reason. You can put money into that Roth and be able to pull money out of that Roth with no penalty coming out, as long as it's your contributed amount, not the interest earned. Okay. So, and what that looks like is there is a maxed portion that can go in every year based on your AGI, and there's some limitations there. So go see a CPA before you do this. Yep. If you pull out, let's say you contributed $10,000 and you want to pull out $5,000 for an emergency purpose, you can do that because you contributed more than that. You have a basis. Okay. It's called a tax basis in there to what is truly taxable there. If you've contributed $10,000 and you go $1 over that, $10,000 and $1, that $1 is going to be taxed and penalized for pulling out. Okay. So be careful and know what you've done there.
But even still on those, you would recommend, if you can avoid taking money out from that.
Absolutely.
Avoid it.
Absolutely. It's kind of the worst of both worlds if you're using it for a savings liquid thing, because it's not doing you any justice as a retirement account or a savings account, because it's doing the worst of both if you're using it for that purpose. Okay. Now, there are other retirement reasons to use them when we get to that later. But. Okay.
So on IRAs and as guardsmen, we have, and federal employees, you have the Thrift Savings Plan, TSP. Yep. Is that similar to a 401k?
Yes.
And talking about IRAs, how do those relate? And how does the TSP work?
Okay, so this answers for individuals that are in the new blended program.
Okay.
And we can get to that later, but and for civilians as well in that area. So what happens is in a TSP, if you contribute 5%, the government will match you 4%, and then add an additional 1% agency no matter what. So all in all, if you contribute 5%, they will give you 5%, and that is a good place to be, because that's a benefit of yours for working for the government. And that is very similar to a 401k that in industry. From an IRA standpoint, an IRA is something that is done outside of your job. It's an individual retirement account. You go through any one of numerous companies that have them, and there are some arguments out there that they can make more return than TSP. There's not a lot of, if you hear that, question it, because there's not a lot of evidence, in my opinion, that backs that up. But people would argue that a really good strategy is to, if you're sitting on a load of money that's over and above what's covering your expenses every month, so you would take your agency match and at least get your 5%, right? So 5% in, get matched 5%, and then go and contribute the annual maximum to an IRA. And we're getting into higher, more advanced retirement strategies here. But in an IRA, you would want to probably do a Roth, because you're making a good amount now, to do the annual maximum. And if you have money outside of that, after doing your annual maximum based on that, you go back to your TSP and contribute more. This is after paying down debt and those other things we've already talked about.
Yes.
So
Okay. But on the matching thing, if you're limited on funds, and we'll go back to the earlier conversation about what should you put into your debt, into savings, but if you have no extra, should you still match? If that 5% match will make a difference in what you're able to pay down on debt, should you focus on paying that down and doing the 5% matching later out of your check, or like once you get that debt paid down, or should you, no matter what, match as much as you can and try to find a little bit to put toward your debt? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question. There's definitely a balance there that has to happen. If it were me, and there are other people that would argue differently, I would matches to the point where you can get your full match. Because that's money just left on the table. That's your compensation that you're not going to be getting, right? As long as you're making your minimum payments on your debt. If you are going into default, we've got a problem. That's when you're sounding the alarm, trying to get money from wherever you can. But if you're making your minimum payments, match as far as you can, and then go back to paying your debt in an aggressive way by cutting expenses and doing those things we've talked about.
Got it. If you can contribute more, do you recommend that?
Absolutely.
Does it make a huge difference? Say they match 5, you put in 10. What difference could that make over the course of 20 years?
A lot. By compounding interest, it makes a huge difference. There are models and tables out there that will show you how much $1 will be today in 30 years. They're based on your return and cost of inflation and all of those things. It's a lot of money, and it's something that nobody should be passing up.
Okay, great. Because that's pretty much the extra 5%. If you were to put in 10, is money you're just for yourself, but adding to that, even though it's not matched, you're still getting compound interest.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. Talk about the different funds and which ones maybe you recommend a guardsman invest in when they first get in, and then when they start getting toward the end of the retirement.
Sure. So the key word here is risk, and that's something we all have to deal with on a daily basis, and especially in retirement. When you are young, and even past halfway in your career, you should be trying to grow that as fast as possible in a reasonable manner. And
by taking risks and
correct, because the market historically rebounds. There has not been very many times in history where something, especially with a diversified portfolio like we have through TSP, if it goes down and you lose some money, don't freak out. Don't panic.
Don't pull everything out and bury it in your yard.
Correct. Leave it. It will rebound. It will come back. So to answer your question on the type of funds you go into, the life cycle funds are really good. So, for example, if you just started your career, there's one out there called the 2050 Life Cycle Fund. That's going to be a higher yield mix of corporate and higher yield bonds that are going to be good for you. Another good option that pays more right now historically, that is a little more risk, is the C Fund. I also recommend that. You're not going to have as big a balance with some other safer type. But
the reward's not as high, but the risk is lower.
Right, but you're young, right? So we're talking about people that are young. That will rebound likely. In a diversified portfolio, you should be fine with something coming back. Now, for individuals getting older in their career, you'll hear the common knowledge of put everything in the G Fund, right? You're getting retirement. Yes and no. So that's a two-pronged reason, in my opinion. And this is fact. We are living longer. So combination of that with the fact that we are, as federal employees, given the option of retiring actually pretty early compared to the rest of the economy. So if you wanted to pull your pension, you have the option. Let's take the standard approach. If you have 30 years in and you reach your minimum retirement age, so you're in somewhere between 56 to 57. If you decide to go right then, you will likely be in retirement prior to those people that are retiring in the industry, which is a common age of anywhere from 65 to 67 usually. So you have to make your money last longer. So if you're putting it in the G Fund, you're not getting as much yield. You want to get more yield over the course of your life. So leaving some of that into a riskier fund and even into retirement is a good option. When you're talking about return on investment, you have to consider inflation too, because your return, it has to be net of inflation. And sometimes when you're dealing with a G Fund, your inflation may be higher than your return. So therefore, in the long run, you could potentially be losing money. I haven't looked at the numbers, but there's a risk there.
So what time frame? You're toward the end of your career. Is it 5 years out? You should think about going less risk. Is it 10 years out, or like what? Or is it 1 year out? Like what would you? Because the nightmare situation would be, you waited too long and the market crashes and you lose half of your retirement that you had built up. And then you see, I actually can't retire yet. I need to stay in longer and hope the market comes back and I can make that money back. Which would be just incredibly depressing. So at what number should someone see and say, okay, that's my comfortable number, I'm going to go ahead and transfer it? Or should it be a more time frame based, like, hey, I'm 5 years out from retiring and do not plan on working, even if I retire at 60. Don't plan on working. I want to go to the Florida Keys and sit my butt on the beach and read books for the rest of my life and just coast. That was a pun, and it was really good. Anyway, so I need laughter. I'm gonna put audience laughter tracks in this one. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Jonesy. Anyway, so what would you base it on? A money number, a magic number that they come up with their CPA, or a time frame on when to transfer their funds to safe?
So it would probably be time frame, but I think it's shorter than you think. You mentioned 5 years. 5 years is an eternity in the market. In my opinion, there's other analysts that may argue differently, but it depends on what outstanding obligations and other risk you're trying to hedge against in your retirement. So this also goes into the argument. This is the full life of your retirement. So we're talking about life insurance too, long-term care, if that's something you are looking into, those types of things. So time frame is really short. I would say within 6 months.
Okay.
If you are happy with the number. But even then, we're going to be in retirement for a lot longer than we think we are now. So I would not say to hedge your risk as much as you think.
Okay. So you should pre-budget knowing what your payments are going to be for your insurance and things like that.
Absolutely.
After retirement, and look at what that number is afterward.
Correct.
What you have.
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to throw this question curveball at you because I never know if they're good or not, but talking retirement and doing a mortgage, they have this thing called a reverse mortgage. Do you know much about that, and is that a bad idea or a good idea?
So I would say for 99% of people, it's probably going to be a bad idea.
Okay. It's a big percentage.
Right. And that's my professional opinion.
Yeah.
I can't endorse 100% or not on certain things, but I will tell you I would not use one.
Okay.
They tout, a lot of these companies that provide this service will tout, live your best life now, go and get a reverse mortgage on your home. But the problem is when you do that, you're giving, let's say you pay down your house, right? You're completely debt free and you get a reverse mortgage. You are taking some of your home value and just allowing the bank to have ownership of that. Okay. And let's say, for example, you go into a horrid example here, but it happens. You fall incredibly ill and you're in the hospital, and you can't make the payments, right? And we're only talking, a few months delinquency or whatever. The bank has the authority to come in at some point in time and take your house. Okay. And that could potentially affect your children, your grandchildren, and your estate as a whole. So I would say avoid them. I would say it's the same as a regular mortgage, but the thing is when you're getting into your retirement age, a really good strategy and something I'm going to be doing for my family is ensuring that our mortgage is paid off before you go into retirement.
Okay. But you still have to consider budgeting things like property taxes, things like that.
Correct.
Some people think, oh, I'm done. You're not.
No.
To include, what's the other one?
Insurance.
Insurance,
Yes.
So, okay. In our show notes, we'll add more information on TSP so that our listeners can go and do research on their own for what funds would best suit them and what each one means for higher risk and lower risk. So
absolutely, the TSP website is a very good resource. Okay. There's a lot of information out there that shows the breakouts, the yields over the past 10, 20 years. They're very transparent. So
let's go back to taxes. So for guardsmen, what taxes, state and federal taxes, do military members have to pay?
So in general, let's just talk about in general first, because the way the tax law works is there are sweeping regulations, and then you get exceptions to these rules, right? Yep. So the general rule is military members pay the exact same tax as everybody else. Because if you don't immediately assume that or understand that, you get yourself in trouble. Yep. With that being said, in the state of Oklahoma right now, military members do not pay state income tax on their guard wages. Okay. So then your drill paycheck, are taxes taken out and then you get it back at the end, or no state taxes are taken out, or is it dependent on how you have it set up? Yes, that last answer. Okay. In general, I would tell you that our HR and the people who process those understand that Oklahoma has no state income tax on those guard wages, so they will not take anything out. For the most part. Okay. There are some exceptions that does happen, but when you're preparing your tax return, there's a reconciliation that has to be done, and you get a refund or you pay that kind of stuff. So it will balance out in the end. Okay. The other one is if you're deployed. There are some instances where guard members that are overseas will get a foreign exclusion, and they don't pay taxes on those on that income made overseas. The way this really helps the military member, the guard member here. DFAS will automatically calculate that. So it's reflected on your W-2. There is no calculation or hardship you have to go through to figure that out and worry of whether or not you're going to be in trouble for not being taxed on a certain amount. DFAS calculates it. It's on your W-2. So you could say that is another benefit of being in the Guard in Oklahoma, Army or Air. You are state tax exempt. Would you use the word exempt, or it's just a benefit that you don't have to pay state taxes if you are a guardsman or military member in the state of Oklahoma? it's not exemption, it's excluded from income.
Okay.
So an exemption, so back in the day, we were talking about personal exemptions back before the tax law change. This is an exclusion from income.
Okay. But it's a benefit. Like, that's another benefit for being, hey, I'm a GUARD member, so I do not pay state taxes only on your drill paycheck. Correct. If you're a GUARD member and you work for a company, you're still paying state taxes on that. Right. Okay.
Correct.
Bummer. We talked in the beginning about seeing a CPA for when you do your taxes. What are the advantages of having a CPA do your taxes versus you doing them yourself, and are there any disadvantages?
Yeah, so the advantages are, there's a lot of them. So you are ensuring correctness, so you're not worried about that, you did something wrong. You have inherent audit protection to some extent, because if you do it more correctly, you're not going to be looked at by the IRS in the sense that, oh, there's something glaringly wrong here. That doesn't mean you won't get audited, because the IRS does do random audits at certain times of the year. So random audits. So don't 100% freak out when you get something in the mail from the IRS. You should be freaking out when you get a call, because those are scammers.
Okay, good to know. That's very good to bring up, actually, because there are a ton of scams going on right now, and there's a website I found that has a list of them, of completely disregard these types of things, and I will add that in the show notes as well. But I'm glad you brought that up.
Yes.
So, okay.
But so the only disadvantage of using a CPA is the cost. I mean, that you're hiring a professional, so you have to weigh, is it worth it to you? Like I had mentioned at the beginning of the show, of if you have a couple of W-2s in your household and that's it, you may use TurboTax instead. It'll be a greater benefit. But if you've got K-1s and you have stock sales and retirement account, you may consider a CPA just to cover your base. Okay.
And then as military, you guys will have to help me remember. There's one for military where they do your taxes for free. It's military.com, MilConnect, something.
I'm not sure. Military One Source, maybe.
Military One Source, that's it. And they partner with someone like a TurboTax or something, and it's as a military member, you can actually get your taxes done free using that type of service. I need to verify, but I'll again put that information in the show notes as well.
Okay. I know the services exist. I'm not too familiar with them though.
So militaryonesource.com is where our listeners would go to find out more, pretty much. So I'll just link to Military One Source, and there's just all kinds of resources for them. Sure. I know you mentioned some references already. What are there any other ones that can help individuals learn on how to invest their money well, how to budget, anything that you think someone should go and educate themselves on financial literacy, which you were going to talk about as well?
Right. Again, not endorsing any of these companies or websites or whatever. Just good resources in general. We'd already mentioned Dave Ramsey. A lot of his stuff is out there. Vanguard has on their website. They are a firm that does retirement. Not necessarily endorsing them. They have good resources out there to understand every one of the retirement accounts we've talked about, and more that you may have never seen. Okay. The tax consequences to some of those. Your local CPA is going to be a good resource, and a certified financial planner is the other one. I had mentioned before, CPAs can't specialize in everything, and a lot of your CPAs are not going to specialize in retirement. CFPs, certified financial planners, they do. That's what they're trained to do, so they will also help you. Okay.
You mentioned before we started the interview you wanted to touch on financial literacy.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So financial literacy is, I can't stress it enough. I think our state is doing a great job in the last couple of years of implementing the requirement for high school students in some districts. Where I come from, more requires it. I can't speak to some of the other districts, but it is required to do a financial personal class in that arena before you can graduate.
Nice.
That's a good step in the right direction.
Not just like you're in home ec and today we're learning on how to balance a checkbook. It's an actual course.
Yes, a personal finance course that you learn stuff about everything from interest to how to do a little bit of a budget, these kinds of things. And that's a good step in the right direction. But it should not stop there. there are topics that you may not see in personal finance until you are old and gray, or close to retirement, or even in the middle of your career or life, or whatever, where you at in your life. So financial literacy is something that has to continue throughout your life. And one good example of this I had mentioned earlier is long-term care. Some people, they've heard about it, they have no idea how that works for them. You may or may not be considering that closer to 40 or 50 years old at that point. So you have to weigh those things even then. So do yourself a favor. If you don't know something, don't be embarrassed. Go ask the good questions, because you always hear the only bad question is the one not answered, or the one not asked. So if you don't know your own benefits, go to HR, ask about those. Go to your supervisor and ask. Go to CPA, ask the questions.
Is there anything else that you would like to add that you think is crucial for our listeners to hear?
I mean, we've covered a lot here. There is stuff I could go into.
Sure.
Any CPA can go into.
And this is all really surface stuff for our listeners. So it's really just to kind of plant the seed in their minds so that they can take that and do more in-depth research. Because we, like you said, we've covered a lot. And I think on a lot of these subjects, we could have an hour episode by themselves, which we could do later on, more like centered on retirement and steps 2 and things like that. Right. So hopefully our listeners got, I know I got a lot out of it, and hopefully this will spark an interest and a knowing that how important that this is, and how important they should, how important it is for them to do research and become financial literate.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
So thank you again so much for coming on the show.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. One thing we did want to mention, and we'll put some information in the show notes, is that there are 3 certified financial planners.
Yep.
Is that
financial
correct?
Counselors. Yep.
Okay.
Same thing, I think.
Yeah. 3 financial counselors, people that can help talk money to you if you can't talk money. They can translate that into a way that can help you and your family budget your finances, get you out of debt, set you on a plan for retirement, and just get you financially comfortable in where you want to be.
This is a benefit of guardsmen and their families. It's completely free. I mean, these counselors are here for you and your immediate family, so use them. I think we've got 2 in the city area and then 1 in Tulsa. So yeah, we'll put their contact information in the show notes. So yeah.
100%. Be sure to like us on Facebook, Twitter, subscribe on YouTube, and leave comments. Let us know what you think, if there are any show ideas that you might have. A lot of this content is driven by you and your audience participation. So please let us know.
Yeah. We are adding a feature to our podcast, kind of an audio story. Brian here is doing the first one. So be on the lookout for those. It's just kind of a journey. Us as public affairs officers, we get to see a lot. And so we want to show those journeys in audio form for our listening audience. So
yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. It's fun for us to put those together, and hopefully fun for you to listen as well. And like Leanna was saying, get that experience of being a service member in the Oklahoma National Guard.
Yeah. All right. We'll see you next month for next month's subject is Suicide Awareness and Prevention, for Suicide Awareness and Prevention Month. And so we'll have some very special guests on that show, so definitely tune in for next month.
For sure.
All right. Good.
All right. Till next month. We'll see you then.
Bye.
Bye.
The OK Guard Show is produced by the Oklahoma National Guard Public Affairs Office. Any mention of products or brands does not imply endorsement. All guests on the show are volunteers in an effort to inform and educate members of the Oklahoma National Guard, their families, retirees, potential recruits, and the community.